Step back into the wildest decade in automotive history. In this video, we're counting down 30 of the weirdest, strangest, most unbelievable cars of the 1950s vehicles. So rare and forgotten that most people today have never heard of them. From bubble cars that looked like flying saucers, to three-wheeled oddities, to futuristic jet-age prototypes that never made it to production, the 1950s were full of bold ideas, failed experiments, and designs that pushed the limits of imagination. The post-war boom was a strange time for cars. On one hand, automakers were obsessed with making things bigger, shinier, and faster. On the other, a massive demand for fuel efficiency in Europe led to an explosion of tiny, strange microcars. This era saw the rise of the bubble cars boom, where tiny, egg-shaped vehicles became a common sight on city streets. These microcars were the answer to post-war austerity, demanding ultra-small vehicles that could sip fuel while navigating narrow roads. They were often charming, sometimes comical, but always memorable, representing a unique solution to a very real problem. At the same time, the allure of the skies captivated designers on both sides of the Atlantic. Jet-age styling was everywhere, and it wasn't just for high-end luxury models. Automakers grafted fins, chrome rocket boosters, and aircraft-inspired dashboards onto even the most humble family sedans. These design cues weren't about performance. They were about selling a dream of speed, progress, and the futuristic promise of the atomic age. Every trip to the grocery store could feel like preparing for takeoff, surrounded by gauges and chrome that mimicked a cockpit. This era of experimentation wasn't limited to just styling. Many forgotten 1950s cars pioneered the use of experimental plastics long before mainstream manufacturers trusted them. Fiberglass and other new polymers offered designers the freedom to create complex, curved body shapes that were impossible or too expensive to produce with traditional steel. These lightweight materials were perfect for small batch, ambitious vehicles, even if the long-term durability and safety was still a massive question mark. The focus on efficiency and urban living also led to some truly bizarre concepts, like the rise of single-seat oddities. Several manufacturers pitched prototypes that were literally one seat wide, envisioning them as the future of personal commuting. These were more like enclosed scooters than cars, designed to slice through city traffic with unparalleled agility. While the idea never caught on, it showed just how radically designers were willing to rethink the very definition of a car. Another common sight in the world of strange 1950s vehicles was the prevalence of three-wheeled designs. Tri-wheel layouts were incredibly common, especially in the microcar segment, because they were cheap to build and often qualified for lower tax and licensing fees. However, this cost-saving measure came with a significant drawback. They were notoriously weird to drive and often dangerously unstable, prone to tipping over in tight corners. It was a trade-off that many small manufacturers were willing to make. For a brief period, the US market saw an invasion of these tiny European imports. Obscure brands from Germany, Italy, and France tried to tempt American buyers with their quirky, fuel-sipping cars. While some, like the Isetta, found a niche, most of these brands vanished from the American landscape as quickly as they arrived, unable to compete with the domestic obsession with size and power, leaving behind a legacy of rare and fascinating automotive footnotes. A key feature of many high-profile concept cars was the bubble canopy. Inspired directly by the domed plexiglass canopies of fighter jets, these clear roofs offered panoramic, unobstructed views and an undeniably futuristic look. The reality, however, was less glamorous. These rolling greenhouses often overheated instantly in the sun, turning the cabin into a sweltering oven and proving that some sci-fi ideas were better left on the drawing board. Don't let their size fool you. Though some of these tiny cars packed a surprising punch, a number of surprisingly fast microcars used aggressively tuned motorcycle engines, giving them wild, almost terrifying acceleration for their size. Of course, this performance often came at the cost of reliability, and these high-strung engines were known to break down spectacularly, but for a brief, thrilling moment, they could outsprint much larger vehicles. One of the most iconic and peculiar trends of the era was the front-opening door, popularized by the BMW Isetta. This design, where the entire front of the car hinged open to allow entry, was a clever solution for parking in tight city spaces. It was undeniably cool, but came with a terrifying safety flaw: in a head-on collision, the only way out was often blocked, trapping the occupants inside. The 1950s also loved the magic of push-button technology. The dream of an automated future led to buttons replacing levers and knobs for all sorts of functions. Transmissions were a popular target, with push-button gear selectors appearing in cars from Chrysler to Eds. But the trend went further, with some experimental models featuring buttons for lights, windows, and even opening the doors, all in the name of modern convenience. Of course, the pinnacle of 1950s automotive fantasy was found in its wild concept cars. GM's Motorama and other major auto shows were a spectacle of radical, one-of-a-kind designs that were never intended for production. These were rolling sculptures meant to dazzle the public and showcase a company's vision for the future, featuring gas turbine engines, autonomous driving concepts, and bodywork that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The experimentation extended to the driver's most basic controls. Some cars toyed with strange steering ideas, completely abandoning the traditional steering wheel. Designers experimented with aircraft-style yokes, joysticks, and even rotating center columns, all in an attempt to create a more futuristic and jet-age driving experience. These ideas were often impractical and unintuitive, reinforcing why the steering wheel has remained a constant for over a century. Even safety became a field for strange innovation, resulting in some odd safety concepts. A few forgotten 1950s cars experimented with padded dashboards and even padded roofs to cushion occupants in a crash. Seatbelts were sometimes offered, but as an optional luxury feature, rather than a standard necessity. Other ideas, like collapsible steering columns, were early attempts to address driver safety in an era when it was still a secondary concern. The post-war economic landscape was fertile ground for dreamers, leading to a flood of tiny off-brand manufacturers. Startups popped up everywhere, each trying to create the definitive people's car. Most of these ambitious companies were underfunded and lacked the engineering prowess to compete, causing them to fail within a year or two, but not before producing some truly weird and wonderful machines. To keep costs down, many of these weird little cars ran on shockingly small power plants, including single-cylinder engines, often borrowed from motorcycles or industrial equipment. These tiny one-cylinder engines were barely powerful enough to move the car and to passengers, chugging along with a distinctive putt-putt sound. They were the absolute embodiment of minimalist engineering. Doors were another area ripe for experimentation, leading to a variety of unusual door layouts. Beyond the front opening door, designers played with sliding doors to save space, dramatic gullwing doors that opened upwards, and even canopy lifts where the entire roof and side panels would tilt open. These designs were often complex and prone to failure, but they added an unforgettable flair to the cars that featured them. Some of the most peculiar creations of the decade were the car scooter hybrids. Several obscure models blurred the line between a motor scooter and a car, featuring the enclosed cabin and seating of an automobile, but controlled with scooter-like handlebars instead of a steering wheel. These were attempts to offer the weather protection of a car with the simplicity and low cost of a scooter, resulting in a truly unique driving experience. The quest for a minimal footprint led to the creation of super-narrow cars. Some microcars were so incredibly thin that two of them could comfortably fit side by side in a single traffic lane. While this was a brilliant idea for navigating congested European cities, it made for terrible stability, especially in crosswinds or on uneven roads, where they could feel dangerously top-heavy. The engineering battles of the era weren't just about size. They also involved fundamental drivetrain layouts. The front-wheel versus rear-wheel battles in the microcar world led to some quirky engineering solutions, with engines often placed in unconventional locations, sometimes next to the driver, sometimes in the rear. The resulting drivetrains often produced strange and unpredictable handling characteristics, making every drive an adventure. Ultimately, the 1950s left a legacy of forgotten brands everywhere. The decade saw dozens of small, ambitious automakers rise and fall. From Goggomobil and Messerschmitt in Germany to Bond in the UK, they left behind a scrapyard of failed dreams, but also a treasure trove of weird, rare, and fascinating cars that barely anyone remembers today, each one a testament to an era of unparalleled automotive creativity. These cars weren't just unusual, they were ahead of their time, dangerously underpowered, or just plain ridiculous. And that's exactly what makes them so fascinating today. If you love classic cars, forgotten history, or the golden age of automotive experimentation, this video is for you. Hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which forgotten 1950s car shocked you the most.